In the summer of 1988, a wealthy Jackson, Mississippi woman disappeared from her home in broad daylight. The only clue left behind was a mysterious ransom note. The FBI and local police struggled to find answers in its cryptic message so they could find the kidnapper and retrieve the victim before her time ran out.
A daring kidnapping and a bizarre ransom note baffled Mississippi authorities. The victim was the wife of a wealthy businessman. A list of 12 names and a few drops of blood were the only clues to her fate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The ransom note gave the FBI its first leads, but the case was not so clear-cut. Solving it required the keen insight of a criminal profiler and the perseverance of a family, local authorities, and the FBI.
"6 a.m., July 26, 1988. The heat of a midsummer day would soon bear down on the southern city of Jackson, Mississippi. Like every weekday for the past 48 years, Annie Laurie Herron had coffee with her husband Robert before he left for work. As early investors in oil, the Herrons had become one of Mississippi's wealthiest couples, with a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. That day, Annie Laurie Herron would host her bridge club at home, the same house where she raised 2 children and lived with her husband since they were newlyweds. By 3:30, Mrs. Herron's bridge game was over and her friends had left. The housekeeper finished cleaning up after the card game and checked if Mrs. Herron needed anything else. The 73-year-old woman said everything was fine. Annie Herron planned to spend the rest of her afternoon reading until her husband returned. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps one of the bridge players or the housekeeper had forgotten something. Her husband wasn't due home for an hour.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. You got to see your husband. I have a letter.
I'm back to see him.
No, I don't mind waiting at all. Let me
Annie Laurie Herron was on her own. At about 4:30 that afternoon, Robert Herron returned from work.
Annie, I'm home.
He saw that his wife wasn't home and figured she was out with her friends or daughter. When she hadn't returned by 5:30, he thought it was strange that his wife of 48 years hadn't called or left a note.
Annie.
The house seemed to be empty.
Annie.
Robert grew concerned and began calling family and friends.
Anywhere that I can tell.
No one had seen Annie since the bridge game.
Maybe we're going to have to do something else. Thank you.
Robert's son-in-law, who lived nearby, said he would be right over. The son-in-law said he and his wife hadn't heard from Mrs. Herron that day.
Oh, right here.
Robert Herron pointed out that when Annie left the house, she usually took her purse.
I've looked everywhere. I called,
But his wife's purse and shoes sat beside her reading chair. Her newspaper and glasses were
The
nearby.
neighbors, you know, are just, I just don't know what to say.
Robert was
Well, she can
worried
go.
since Mrs. Herron's
Well,
medicine for a
she's
chronic intestinal disease was still in the bathroom.
I just know something's happened.
She would need to take it soon or she would not be able to absorb food.
Look again.
The men continued to search for some indication of where she'd gone. A piece of paper near the front door caught the son-in-law's eye. It was a ransom note without specific instructions. Annie Laurie Herron had been kidnapped.
We've got to do something real fast.
The note demanded that Robert Herron pay 12 separate men before 10 days passed, but it didn't say how much or where to send the money. He was ordered not to call police, so he waited for a ransom call with instructions on getting his wife back. When none came by nightfall, he contacted the Jackson Police Department despite being warned not to. Officers secured the ransom note, hoping to keep any fingerprints intact. Processing the house for evidence, officers discovered a trace of what appeared to be blood on the front door frame. Laboratory tests would later reveal that it was blood and that it matched Mrs. Herron's blood type. A Jackson police detective interviewed Robert Herron. They wanted to know if he or his wife had ever been threatened.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
He had no idea who would want to harm
It
them.
was there for me to find. It's a ransom.
If Mrs. Herron were without her medication for long, her intestinal condition would become critical.
Just hold it just like that.
Kidnapping is a crime that must be solved quickly, or the chances of rescuing the victim are slim. That evening, Jackson police contacted Special Agent Patrick McGlennon of the FBI's Jackson Field Office to bring the resources of the federal government to bear right away.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI has jurisdiction whenever an individual is kidnapped in the United States. The presumption in this case, of course, was a kidnapping had occurred, a ransom demand had been made, and the possibility of travel interstate is in fact why the FBI gets involved in these types of matters.
The FBI called U.S. Attorney James Tucker, who would advise investigators in legal matters as the case developed. Like most residents of Jackson, Tucker had great admiration for the Herrons.
Robert Herron was a self-made man, and at the time of this incident, which was 1988, Mr. Herron was probably considered one of the foremost financial wizards here in the Jackson area. He was well known in the business community. He was a generous person, so he was becoming well known for his particular acts of generosity.
By dawn the next day, FBI agents and evidence technicians arrived at the Herrons' home. The Jackson police detective filled in the case agent on what they'd learned so far. The FBI set up a satellite command post at the residence and tapped the Herrons' phone, ready to trace any ransom calls. There was little doubt that multimillionaire Robert Herron was the real target. Yet Mr. Herron hadn't been told what to pay to get his wife back.
It was impossible to comply, or nearly impossible to comply, with the demands because they were nonspecific in nature. Mrs. Herron was not even mentioned in the note. There was no provision for her safe return.
The note did say that the 12 men listed had been involved in the same photography company. Robert Herron explained that he had once served as chairman of the board for that company. Some of the company's franchisees had been sued to recoup losses, but Herron did not know which ones. It seemed unlikely that the 12 men named had kidnapped Mrs. Herron, but perhaps one or more of them was striking back at the company through Robert Herron. Technicians collected samples of all the writing pads and paper in the Herrons' home. They would compare the paper to the ransom note to see if it had been written on the stock from the house. The results would take a few days. Investigators searched outside the house for hairs, blood, clothing, anything that might reveal the kidnapper's identity. They looked for cigarette butts or evidence of food or drink, signs that someone had been watching the house. They found nothing.
And yesterday afternoon, did you see
Neighbors and domestic workers reported seeing nothing strange at the house the previous afternoon,
any activity?
and no one had seen Mrs. Heron leave.
Quiet neighborhood, we should.
The next day, agents continued canvassing the Herons' neighborhood.
Dr. Posey?
They questioned a doctor who lived down the street.
Detective Johnson, Jackson Police Department would like to ask.
He said that he had seen something in the neighborhood recently that might be related to the kidnapping. 2 weeks earlier, the doctor was going to run errands when he drove past a white van parked near his house. From that position, anyone in the van would have a clear view of the Heron house.
Around here?
Yeah, about 50 blocks.
At first, the doctor thought nothing of it.
And,
But when he'd returned home hours later, the van was still there. Thinking the driver needed help, the doctor offered his assistance.
Can I help you with anything? Wondering if you need some help.
The driver responded by asking if there was a law against parking in the neighborhood. It was an odd response, enough to make the doctor remember the incident.
Thank you, sir. If you think of anything else...
He said the van drove away minutes later.
Thank you, Dr. Posey.
Agents continued to canvass the Herons' neighborhood and found another neighbor who had seen a white van on the street 3 months earlier.
The other neighbor had seen a van similar to that described by the first individual, sitting almost directly in front of the Heron residence in the very earliest days of April of 1988. She was suspicious enough of the van to get the license plate number.
If investigators could find that van, they might also find Mrs. Heron. But a computer check revealed that the license plate had been stolen from a car at the New Orleans airport. It was another dead end. After 36 hours of investigation and no ransom calls, agents hoped lab results on the note would provide a fresh lead to Mrs. Heron or her abductor. FBI examiners first determined that the note had been typed on paper foreign to the Herons' home. They also compared the typeface to known samples from every typewriter made in this century.
The laboratory division was able to determine that the demand letter was in fact typed by a Royal typewriter manufactured between 1912 and 1927. There was nothing else contained on the demand letter which would give analysts any type of ability to tell us the manufacturer of the paper or whether there were any indented writing or other evidence on the letter.
A latent fingerprint examination revealed nothing, and a spot on the note believed to be a bloodstain was too small to analyze.
Pretty level plane here.
Although no evidence on the note helped agents, they hoped its message would. The note demanded that Robert Heron pay 12 men who were involved with a photography company. Perhaps the kidnapper was among them. Agents learned that the company had foreclosed on each of the 12 men, all former franchisees, to collect heavy debts. One of the company's executives provided the FBI with company files and photos of those men.
Are you going to have to take those with you?
Yes, sir.
One was now deceased. The others were scattered throughout the country.
Yes, sir.
At the FBI's Jackson field office, agents split up the 11 names and began to review the files and photographs. They sent leads to FBI offices in the towns and cities where the men currently lived, requesting additional information. Agents found that many had financial troubles. They tried to ascertain if those men had traveled near the Heron neighborhood when the white van was spotted there, and again recently when the kidnapping occurred. FBI agents across the country began covert surveillance on the former franchisees. They hoped one of the men would lead them to the ailing 73-year-old woman. But as the kidnapping investigation stretched into its third day, only 7 days remained on the ransom note deadline, and agents still lacked instructions on how to recover Annie Laurie Heron alive.
Hi, how are you, ma'am?
I'm fine.
3 days
How
had
are you?
passed since Annie Laurie Heron, an elderly grandmother, had been abducted from her Jackson, Mississippi home in broad daylight. The FBI continued surveillance on 11 men named in the ransom note found inside the Herons' home. Agents couldn't confront the men. A frightened kidnapper might harm the victim. Special Agent Patrick McGlennon hoped one of them would lead to the missing woman.
We wanted to determine if they were traveling even small distances from their residences or business. We wanted to see if they perhaps were keeping Mrs. Heron at a remote location where they might have to provide food, water, other conveniences for her, that they wouldn't want to be too far away from the victim.
Despite the efforts of dozens of agents around the country, they discovered no direct leads to Mrs. Heron's whereabouts. But they still resisted contacting the 11 men directly so as not to reveal the investigation. The FBI considered the possibility that the kidnapper might be someone other than the men listed on the note. Agents contacted the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia for assistance. Profilers in the unit are agents trained to determine characteristics of criminals from the details of a case. One profiler reviewed the evidence, particularly the ransom note, looking for indications of the kidnapper's psychological makeup. The profiler called in his findings to the Jackson FBI agents working the Heron kidnapping.
You mind if I put you on speakerphone so we can all listen at one time? Yeah. All right, go ahead.
In the
We're all
conference
listening.
call,
What'd you find out?
the profiler confirmed that the kidnapper was likely one of the 11 suspects currently under surveillance.
Damages here, which nobody else would ever use. So.
And since all those men had at least some college education, he believed one of them had intentionally misspelled words and used an old typewriter to throw off investigators.
He has a fixation.
The profiler said the abduction was an act of revenge against Robert Heron by a paranoid individual who was willing to kill.
The Behavioral Science Unit believed that a sole perpetrator was responsible for this crime, that it would be a white male of approximate middle age, and that the individual would probably be working alone, although if they were working in concert with someone else, that person would provide a very subordinate role.
It's bad.
The profiler also concluded that by this time, there was only a 50% chance that Annie Heron was still alive. One further detail caught the profiler's eye, a phrase that did not seem to match the rest of the note and might point to the profession of the kidnapper.
The note said, "Pay them whatever damages are owed to them. If any is dead, pay their children." Damages is a legal term. It was telling in that one of the individuals on that demand note was an attorney.
Special Agent Tom Montgomery of the FBI's Jacksonville, Florida office was called in to investigate the attorney listed on the note, a man named N. Alfred Wynn.
After we received the name of N. Alfred Wynn, we did the public record background checks. We also contacted the St. Petersburg Police Department, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, found that he had no criminal record, did our own computer checks also. We determined that he was a St. Petersburg attorney and that he lived above his office.
Yeah. What's this all about?
Well, I'm investigating a crime.
An agent went to interview Wynn at his office residence.
So, Mr. Wynn, you were camping at the girl.
Alfred Wynn said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping and explained where he was on July 26th, the day Mrs. Heron went missing.
Okay.
He had been at a bar with a prostitute. He said that on that evening he had called his paralegal back at the office.
Okay. Hey, thanks.
He asked the employee to meet him at the bar to lend him $100 so he could go home with the prostitute.
We got a deal, sweetheart. So, all right. Big time. How about you?
The paralegal promised to be right over.
Come on. Hey,
Wynn said he and the prostitute went outside.
yeah, girl. Hey. Okay.
He stalled for time as he waited for his paralegal to show up with the money. The two were in Wynn's car when his assistant arrived.
Hey, done. Hey, way to go.
Wynn
Good
took
man.
the money, then left with the prostitute.
Pay much attention
Wynn
to
said he
it.
didn't remember much about the evening. He didn't know the name of the bar or the prostitute's real name. The next day, agents checked the alibi with Wynn's paralegal when the attorney was out of the office. He corroborated his boss's story and also claimed that he didn't know the bar's name since he had never been there before or since. Agents suspected both men were lying.
We learned that Wynn had paid for the paralegal schooling at a local community college, his paralegal schooling. We had learned that he was working for basically a very minimum salary, and there was a lot of allegiance between the paralegal and Mr. Wynn.
Later, an agent re-interviewed Wynn's paralegal, explaining their suspicions. He maintained that he had met Wynn at the bar on the same day of the kidnapping, though he did reveal something new about his boss. He said that Wynn's legal battle with the photography company had begun when the company foreclosed on him 7 years earlier, and that he had fought the lawsuit with a vengeance. He had attempted to declare bankruptcy 3 times in order to avoid paying his debts. Under a court order to recover the money, the U.S. Marshal's Office had confiscated Wynn's valuables, including 1,000 shares of expensive stock. They also impounded Wynn's European sports coupe, a car the paralegal said Wynn loved. In addition, they put his St. Petersburg office up for auction. On July 6, 1988, less than 3 weeks before Mrs. Heron disappeared, Wynn had been notified of an eviction hearing. But he had refused to leave. The paralegal said that Wynn had been furious, believing that the photography company had ruined his life.
Going to get that date from me? You're going to check that date?
The FBI wondered if the paralegal had been involved in the kidnapping.
Okay. Thanks.
We pulled all vehicles registered to the paralegal, friends and associates of Mr. Wynn, to include Mr. Wynn, and learned that the paralegal had a white van registered to him, and through an interview of the paralegal learned that the vehicle was utilized by Wynn on several occasions.
It seemed to be a major breakthrough in the case. The vehicle identification number revealed the name of the previous owner. An agent went to interview her.
You're right, it's just like you said.
He didn't return until
She said Alfred Wynn, not his paralegal, had been the actual buyer. She said that Wynn had acted strangely. He was adamant that his name not be written on the title. So the woman left the line for the buyer's name blank. The lead was promising, but then agents learned that the van had been in the repair shop on the day of the kidnapping.
Okay, how long was he gone?
It was one more frustration in a difficult case. After more than a week, the FBI and U.S. Attorney James Tucker were no closer to finding Mrs. Heron.
A case like this is extremely difficult when you don't have an eyewitness to any one of several situations. We did not have an eyewitness as to the abduction itself. We did not have an eyewitness that Newton Alfred Wynn or any of the other people listed in the particular note had ever been in Mrs. Heron's company.
At the Jackson, Mississippi police station, investigators again met with the doctor who had seen a white van in the Herons neighborhood.
Go through those and see if there's anybody you recognize.
They hoped he could recognize the driver in a photo lineup.
Short here.
The neighbor quickly picked out the photo
That's him.
of Alfred
Sure,
Wynn.
I'm positive.
He was certain it was Wynn he saw reading a map in a white van across the street from his house in mid-July, less than 2 weeks before Mrs. Heron's abduction. The other neighbor, who had seen a similar van, also identified Wynn as the driver. It was clear to agents that Alfred Wynn was connected to the kidnapping of Annie Laurie Heron, yet they didn't know how.
Coming in. Thank you very much.
Give me a call if you need it.
We thought, because of the positive identification, that Wynn was definitely somehow involved in the kidnapping. If not the actual perpetrator, if not the man who walked up to the door and actually grabbed Mrs. Heron, he certainly was directing or calling the shots.
Yep.
FBI agents kept Wynn under surveillance. They believed that he could lead them to the missing woman. But as the deadline in the ransom note approached, hopes of finding the frail Mrs. Heron dimmed further. The day after the deadline in a ransom note, FBI agents and local detectives briefed the husband of kidnapped Jackson, Mississippi socialite Annie Laurie Heron in preparation for a televised appeal for his ailing wife's return.
We'll be able to do it.
Okay, thank you.
The note hadn't outlined specific steps to earn Mrs. Heron's release. FBI behavioral profilers hoped the press conference would prompt the kidnapper to contact Mr. Heron with instructions to get his wife back unharmed. With his son and daughter at his side, Robert Heron asked anyone with any information to come forward.
As a businessman,
He also spoke directly to the kidnapper, promising to follow any specific instructions. A week later, the plan seemed to have worked. On August 15th, 1988, Robert Heron spotted the familiar handwriting of his wife among his mail. The envelope was postmarked August 12th from Atlanta, Georgia. Investigators were careful not to destroy any evidence that might have been left on it. Mr. Heron believed the letter was in his wife's handwriting, too. FBI lab examiners later confirmed that it was. In the letter, Mrs. Heron begged her husband to do what the kidnappers wanted, or they would seal her up in a cellar with only a few jugs of water. Though the letter provided no instructions on how to comply, for Special Agent Patrick McGlennon, it did bring new encouragement just when all hope of recovering Mrs. Heron alive seemed lost.
When we received the August 15th letter, which was in Mrs. Heron's handwriting, it really lifted the spirits of everybody that was involved in the case. We felt reasonably sure that she was in good enough condition to write the letter, and we were going to get her back the same way.
The letter itself had been dated August 10th, 15 days after the abduction. Yet no one could be sure Mrs. Heron was alive on that date. It was unclear if she had written the letter on her own, or if the message was coerced, according to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery.
Certain words utilized on the letter seal me up in the cellar with jugs of water. In talking to family members, we found out that those are not words that she would normally utilize. She would have used the word basement or bottles of water. So it is our belief that the letter was dictated to her.
If the letter had been dictated, both the message and the date could be false. Having to guess at what exactly he should do, Mr. Heron wrote checks to all the men listed in the original ransom note, according to U.S. Attorney James Tucker.
He had already instructed his people to make efforts to determine what financial situations he had had with each of the people that were listed in the original note. So he had some idea at that particular point about how much money had been involved with each of those people.
Mr. Heron settled on restitution, roughly equivalent to the amount the men had been ordered to pay in their franchise lawsuits. The total came to almost $1 million. Herron sent $145,000 to the prime suspect, Alfred Wynn. Enclosed with each check was a note requesting the safe return of his wife. The FBI instructed the Postal Service to deliver the envelopes the next day. Later, agents spoke with Wynn's paralegal and learned of the attorney's reaction to Mr. Herron's check.
When Mr. Wynn received his check in Tampa, Florida, he opened it, read the contents of the letter from Mr. Herron, turned to his paralegal and stated, "This is not what I wanted."
He told his paralegal that what he had wanted was to get his life back, the return of his confiscated car, jewelry, and other property. Wynn sent back the check with a note enclosed, saying he hoped Mrs. Herron would be returned safely. Agents now believe that Alfred Wynn had kidnapped Mrs. Herron for revenge against the photography company Herron once chaired, not for monetary gain. That meant it was less likely Mrs. Herron would ever be returned alive. Although some of the people receiving checks kept the money, most returned similar responses.
Some of the people that Mr. Herron sent these checks to sent the checks immediately back to him, sent letters, or called on the telephone, expressing their regret to Mr. Herron that something like this could happen to his wife. They wanted nothing to do with the money, and they weren't going to benefit through his grief.
2.5 months passed without further word from Annie Herron's kidnapper. Considering her fragile health, chances were slim she would survive this long. In early November 1988, the case was featured on a national crime-solving television series. Agents around the country chased each of hundreds of leads called in. One call from a woman in Florida seemed especially promising. Although none of the names on the ransom note had been broadcast, she said that if Alfred Wynn were on the list, she had important information. The FBI learned that the Florida woman was a spiritual advisor, which did not initially bolster confidence among agents.
Special Agent Montgomery from the FBI. We spoke on the phone.
But after a brief interview, they realized she had a strong reputation in the law enforcement field, having often assisted police in the past.
I recognized some of the information that he...
The advisor told an agent she had first met N. Alfred Wynn 4 years earlier. In 1984, he had his first consultation, asking her advice about problems he had with the head of a photography company, the same company mentioned in the Herron ransom note.
She instructed him to pursue his problems through the court system and take legal means, and he told her that he had already done that, and it just didn't work.
That's the big problem. That is the biggest
Wynn
problem.
said he wanted to kidnap the head of the company and hold him hostage until he got what he wanted. He had the perfect place to put the man and said that he was looking for someone to help him. He called her a month and a half later to ask if she would help.
Besides, I go without risking losing these clients. Trying to get new clients.
She declined.
It's tough too, but
The advisor provided the FBI with records of her work with Wynn. Once assured agents would protect her, she agreed to become a cooperating witness and promised to contact Wynn to arrange a meeting.
Anything else, or if you want to talk to me, if you want to just think of anything at all that might be helpful, please give me a
FBI technicians would wire her office for sound and video.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Our plan was to draw Mr. Wynn into a face-to-face meeting with her and to have them discuss their prior discussions of this kidnapping of Mr. Herron, as well as any of the other things that would verify exactly what he had said to her during their prior meetings.
Alfred Wynn took the bait. The monitored meeting took place in early December 1988. FBI agents watched as Wynn approached the office. Agents hoped he would reveal the whereabouts of the missing woman. The advisor told Wynn she had seen the crime show on television and asked if he had kidnapped Annie Herron.
FBI one, can you hear him in there?
Wynn denied it, adding that he had decided not to abduct Robert Herron as he had previously discussed with the advisor. The recording corroborated the advisor's statement, but it didn't provide agents with the evidence needed to arrest Alfred Wynn. When Wynn left the office, FBI agents followed him.
We hoped a meeting between Mr. Wynn and the psychic would lead him to, at the very least, check on the location of Mrs. Herron's body or lead us to a co-conspirator.
But the suspect never went to visit a place where the body could have been kept. Weeks later, agents learned that Wynn owned a cabin in Florida's swampland, a perfect place to hide a body. Dead or alive, agents hoped they'd find Annie Herron there. They had no way of knowing if the house was booby-trapped or if someone was armed and waiting inside. 6 months after 73-year-old Annie Herron was kidnapped in Mississippi, FBI agents hoped to find her in a remote Florida cabin owned by prime suspect Alfred Wynn. A message from the kidnapper had threatened that the elderly woman would be sealed alive in a cellar. But agents found no cellar. The police was empty of anything related to the kidnapping. FBI Special Agent Patrick McGlennon and other investigators continued searching for the kidnapped woman nearby.
We began to look in dry cisterns, some swamp area adjacent to those properties, the outbuildings, screened porches, whatever structures existed. We found no sign of Mrs. Herron, and no sign that anybody had ever stayed there for any length of time. Certainly no cellars. There were no cellars in that section of Florida.
Annie Herron was still missing and presumed dead. Then, in late July of 1989, Alfred Wynn sent a filing cabinet to the IRS, challenging them to find disputed financial documents.
All right, guys, we got the filing cabinet with it waiting on Wynn from the IRS. Go ahead, move it in there. That's good.
But he failed to check the cabinet thoroughly, and his arrogance would bring him down.
Wynn, we believe, sent those thousands of documents to Internal Revenue Service as part of an effort to intimidate them into leaving him alone. That was a pattern that the agents discovered in regard to Wynn conduct in a number of situations. His arrogance was demonstrated in his efforts to overpower whoever he was involved with at any particular point.
When they found letters regarding a kidnapping and murder plot, IRS agents called the FBI. The documents outlined how Wynn and a former girlfriend had been planning to kidnap and kill the woman's husband. According to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery, the similarities to Annie Herron's abduction were obvious.
They mentioned utilizing an old typewriter to type a communication, and the first ransom note for Annie Laurie Herron was typed on an old 1920s vintage typewriter. They also mentioned detailed maps, surveillance of the area. They also mentioned that it was actually Wynn that was going to do the crime, and the female was just going to help him and obtain what he needed.
FBI agents tracked down Wynn's ex-girlfriend at the community college where she worked. They needed to question her about the plot outlined in the letters. At first, she claimed she knew nothing about the plot. But when reminded that interfering with an investigation was itself a crime, she decided to cooperate.
The last time you saw him was a few years ago?
She said the plot to kill her husband was Wynn's idea. When she realized he was serious, she had broken up with Wynn.
6 months ago. Mailed it from Miami.
Agents asked if she'd had any contact with him since then. She said that a year earlier, in early August 1988, Wynn had asked her to meet him at a motel in DeLand, Florida. It was just days after Annie Herron had been kidnapped. Wynn acted paranoid, silently handing her a note that asked if her car was bugged and if she'd been followed. When he was convinced it was safe, he began talking.
What's this all about?
Wynn asked her to mail a letter for him, offering her $500 plus travel expenses.
First of all, do not touch it.
She agreed, and he paid her half in advance, $250.
They're in there. Very, very important.
Wynn handed her an envelope wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Then he gave her very specific instructions. She was not to touch the envelope or even look at the address. Wynn ordered her to mail it from Atlanta, buy the airline tickets under a false name, and fly into and out of 2 different airports. He instructed her to change her appearance before the trip. She complied, changing her clothes, jewelry, and hair in the women's restroom at the airport. Once in Atlanta, she was to mail the envelope precisely on August 11th. But the woman told agents it was late in the day when she made it to a mailbox. At the last moment, she said she couldn't resist a glance at the address. The letter, allegedly sent by Annie Laurie Herron, was postmarked on August 12th from Atlanta.
Have you seen this
Agents showed the woman a photo of the envelope Robert Herron had received. She immediately recognized the distinctive handwriting. It was the envelope she had mailed.
You have on this? I'd like to clarify.
She said that she had thrown away the napkin used to carry the envelope on a rural road.
Thank you.
She offered to take them there once she finished work. That evening, she brought the agents to the area. Investigators knew there was little chance they would find the napkin on the roadside after more than a year, but they looked anyway. They needed it to corroborate her story. Against all odds, they found it. But they wanted an admission in Alfred Wynn's own words. With a solid cooperating witness, agents were getting closer to arresting Wynn. At the FBI's request, Wynn's ex-girlfriend agreed to be wired for an audio tape meeting between herself and Wynn.
We had hoped that Mr. Wynn would discuss facets of the crime, that he would tell her what she had accomplished by sending the letter to the Herron residence, that he would thank her for her help, that he would pay her.
The woman called Wynn and set up a meeting. Agents had instructed her to try to draw Wynn out about the trip to Atlanta. As hoped, Wynn gave his ex-girlfriend the $250 he still owed her for mailing the envelope. Wynn refused to talk in detail about his plan, and he never mentioned Annie Laurie Herron. He seemed to have stonewalled investigators again. Convinced he was involved and desperate to find Mrs. Herron, the FBI knew they had to arrest Wynn soon. On March 11th, 1989, the FBI was ready to arrest suspected kidnapper Alfred Wynn. They set up a second meeting with Wynn's former girlfriend who had begun cooperating with authorities. The ex-girlfriend had been wired so agents could record the conversation. They hoped Wynn would say something incriminating about the kidnapping of Annie Herron, so they could charge him and recover Mrs. Herron or her body. FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery had coached the informant on how to deal with Wynn in this crucial second meeting.
We had instructed her to become more aggressive in this meeting and to basically indicate to him that she was aware that she was involved in a criminal act, that she'd been watching television, and that she now realized that the letter that she mailed may in fact be involved in the kidnapping, may have been a second ransom note, hoping to elicit from him something to incriminate him further.
Agents watched and listened as the woman pushed Wynn about the Heron kidnapping. The suspect soon became defensive and left the car without admitting any knowledge of the crime.
He's pulling out. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Agents knew it was time to make their move. The element of surprise is critical to a safe arrest. Alfred Wynn was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, mailing a threatening communication, and perjury for testifying in front of a grand jury that he wasn't involved in the kidnapping. But agents still had no solid proof that he or an accomplice had in fact abducted Annie Heron. In Wynn's car, agents discovered several maps of Mississippi, one with a Jackson exit marked on it in pen and notes in the margin. Agents thought these might indicate where Mrs. Heron's body had been placed, but extensive searches yielded nothing. Securing a warrant, Florida FBI agents searched Wynn's office. They needed physical evidence to prove Wynn was involved in the abduction of Annie Laurie Heron. Their hopes rose when they spotted a vintage typewriter. Special Agent McGlennon recalled that FBI examiners had determined the ransom note was typed on a 1920s-era Royal typewriter, the exact model recovered from Wynn's office.
This seemed to be a very significant break. In my mind, this was the typewriter upon which Wynn typed the initial demand note that was left in the Heron's home. We sent it to the lab, fully expecting them to come back with a report saying, this is the exact typewriter that composed that letter.
The FBI lab determined that the typewriter found in Wynn's office was not the one used to type the ransom note. Agents believed Wynn had planted a different typewriter to bring doubt to later prosecution. They had also found a business card for a van rental company in Wynn's office.
How you doing?
The company owner said Alfred Wynn had rented white vans 3 times.
I'm the manager.
Each time he had driven more than 500 miles, just 100 miles more than the round trip to the Heron's residence.
Yes, I do, but I don't have a computer.
The rental times did not coincide with the date of the abduction, but one did match the date when Alfred Wynn was sighted in the Heron's neighborhood. U.S. Attorney James Tucker had little evidence to prove his case. He believed that Wynn and his paralegal were lying about the suspect being with a prostitute on the day of the kidnapping.
We went back and confronted the paralegal with this false alibi. The agents and I had a heart-to-heart talk with him, at which he decided that he better tell us that all that was a lie, and that Mr. Wynn had in fact been out of his law offices and out of pocket during the entire time that the abduction occurred, which would have been the crucial dates, the 24th through about the 28th.
This would help prove perjury, but it wasn't enough to charge Wynn with the crime they were certain he had committed, the kidnapping and murder of Annie Laurie Heron. The federal trial for conspiracy to kidnap began in Mississippi on January 29, 1990.
Throughout the investigation and the 2-week trial, which occurred in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Wynn professed his innocence. But at the conclusion, a jury of his peers found him guilty for the crimes for which he was charged.
N. Alfred Wynn received the maximum sentence allowed. 19 years and 7 months for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has no chance of parole from the federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
We have never to this day resolved where Mrs. Herron is now, and the family deserves to know that. In fact, as far as this office is concerned, we still carry this as an open matter, and will continue to do so until such time as somebody steps forward and helps us out with locating where Mrs. Herron is. Family deserves it.
Mr. Robert Herron died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. In May of 1991, Mrs. Annie Laurie Herron was declared dead to allow the settlement of the couple's estate. The Herron family still hopes to someday learn what happened to their mother, to begin to heal their pain, and to finally lay her to rest.
After tapping all their resources, investigators are unable to link the killer to his crime. Will 6 beer bottles make a case? A woman is pulled from her watery grave. The only witnesses have taken wing. Detectives must use an empty cocoon to catch a murderer. A shrewd serial poisoner stays one step ahead of the law. To stop him, investigators need to rouse a confession from a graveyard of deleted computer files. Police rarely have the benefit of smoking guns or bloody fingerprints to solve crimes. After the obvious leads grow cold, detectives with an eye for detail can use science to probe the most unlikely sources. November 1996, Friday the 13th. A man and his dog took their usual morning stroll past the soccer fields at the YMCA in Columbia, South Carolina. But on this day, something stopped them in their tracks. What he thought was a childish prank turned out to be frighteningly real. Face down in the grass lay the motionless body of a woman. Her hair was covered with blood. Authorities confirmed that the woman was dead, shot several times in the head at close range. Using her body temperature as a gauge, they estimated that she had died just hours before, sometime between 3 and 4 that morning. Investigators scoured the grass. Not knowing what might yield a clue, they photographed and collected all the litter found around the body. The shoulder pad from a woman's blouse might have been ripped out during a struggle. An empty purse pointed to robbery as the motive. 2 empty beer bottles could hold a killer's fingerprints. It was too soon to tell. Expanding their search, police found evidence of more immediate value. 3 shell casings and 2 spent slugs. This told investigators that the woman had been shot at this location, not simply dumped here. Also, it gave them the basis for a ballistics comparison. But first, they'd need a suspect, and before they could find one, they'd need to know who the victim was. The body was brought to Richland Memorial Hospital, where she was identified from fingerprints as 30-year-old Virginia Russell. She'd had a police record for driving while intoxicated. Back in the lab, the forensics case was at a standstill. Technicians could find no physical link to the killer. The shoulder pad was a dead end. The fingerprints on the beer bottles were too smeared to identify. The body was lacking any foreign hairs, fibers, or other samples that might link a suspect to the crime.
Sergeant.
Detectives turned to friends and family.
Cream, sugar?
No, it's fine, thanks.
In talking to the victim's aunt, investigators learned that the hospital where her body now lay was actually the last place Virginia was seen alive. She had spent the last night of her life visiting her cousin's sick baby. Relatives were pleased to see that after a struggle with alcoholism, Virginia Russell was turning her life around. Since taking a new job at a nighttime cleaning service, her wallet was always filled with cash. This made detectives speculate about robbery as a motive. No wallet had yet been found. They probed for more information. The aunt remembered Russell's beeper going off. When Russell returned the page, she was overheard taking directions to an address in the neighborhood of Olympia. But Russell wasn't heading out to clean an office. Nor was that the line of work that paid her bills. As another family member conceded to police, Virginia Russell was a call girl working for an escort service. The job put her in the company of any number of shadowy characters, most of whom concealed their identities. With such a suspect list, the case would be challenging, if not impossible, to solve. But police caught a break. The day after the body was discovered, they found her car in a parking lot in Olympia. There was blood on the console. In the back seat, inside its carrier, was a single bottle of Michelob Light, the same brand found near her body. The car was towed to the police lab, where technicians searched for fingerprints, hair, and fiber. They found nothing. They took blood samples from the dashboard. It matched the victim's blood type. Russell must have been shot at least once while in the car. Detectives had come a step closer to piecing together the actual crime, but they were nowhere in their manhunt. When Sergeant Andrew Caldwell of the Richland County Sheriff's Office learned about the murder, he suspected that it wasn't an isolated incident. He was puzzling over a rape case at the time and wondered if the same brutal individual could be responsible for both crimes. His theory was based on more than a hunch.
One of the major similarities were both were employed by escort services as call girls, as well as the location of Virginia Russell's car. Virginia Russell's vehicle was found within eyesight of the apartment where the sexual assault had occurred earlier.
If Caldwell could solve the rape case, he might catch a killer in the process. On the evening of November 10th, 3 days before Virginia Russell's death, a 20-year-old call girl was dropped off in Olympia by a driver from the service. She was to meet a man who said his name was Daniel Davis. The man attacked her almost immediately. If she wanted to live, he told her, she'd have to comply with his every whim. He dragged her to the bedroom and sexually assaulted her. After the attack, he emptied the young woman's wallet and threw her out of the house. As she wandered, dazed, into the neighborhood, her assailant drove away. She got one last look at his face before calling for help. Daniel Davis was a fake name. The apartment, investigators learned, was rented to a man named Roy Beck, Jr., who matched the description the victim gave police. His was a familiar name around the department. A series of burglaries had kept him in and out of trouble since his teenage years. From a computerized database, investigator Randy Strange compiled a group of images from a library of mugshots.
By bringing up the specifics of the suspect as far as age, race, height, hair color, the computer automatically gives us possible candidates that match the suspect.
Like Roy Beck, all of the men were in their mid-20s, around 5'5", with dark hair. From that lineup, the victim identified Roy Beck, Jr. as her attacker. Officers went to Beck's apartment to arrest him for the attack on the call girl, but he was one step ahead of them. They found the place abandoned and in disarray. The power had been turned off. Beer bottles and other garbage were strewn on the floor. Armed with a search warrant, investigators combed through the mess, looking for clues linking Beck to the rape. They found ammunition for various guns. Detectives thought they had found a positive link between Beck and the murder of Virginia Russell. But none of the ammunition matched the fatal bullets. Investigators directed their energy into finding Beck. To get their hands on him, they set up a sting. They obtained an arrest warrant for the sexual assault, then contacted Beck's old girlfriend.
We were able to persuade her into helping us find him. She paged him and he returned the page and asked for her to come pick him up at an apartment complex in town.
When Beck emerged from his hideout to meet her, he was arrested and brought to the station for questioning. In the meantime, detectives went upstairs to the apartment where Beck had been hiding out. The apartment belonged to Beck's friend, Richard Bulliard. Bulliard consented to a search and pointed investigators to a loaded gun on the sofa. That wasn't the only weapon they found.
We were able to locate a large Rambo-style hunting knife, which was described by our rape victim and used in that crime, as well as a phone book in Beck's room that he was using with various escort services underlined and highlighted.
The gun, knife, and a pair of boots were collected and brought to the lab, where the first solid links to Virginia Russell's murder were forged. Ballistics proved that the gun found in Bulliard's apartment was used to kill Russell. The boots had blood on them, consistent with the victim's type.
Not me, man. Yeah.
With the evidence mounting against him, it seemed impossible that Beck could dodge a murder conviction. But he did his best to wriggle out of it by laying the blame on his friend, Richard Bulliard. The gun was in fact registered to Bulliard, and, Beck argued, the boots belonged to him too. Investigators couldn't deny that all the evidence was found in Bulliard's, not Beck's, apartment. Investigators were at an impasse. The rape victim's testimony had established Beck's violent pattern of call girl solicitation and robbery, but that evidence was circumstantial at best. Without tangible clues, investigators had no way of proving beyond reasonable doubt that Beck had ever been with Russell or that he, and not Bulliard, had fired the gun. With the case crumbling before their eyes, detectives had to gamble on a long shot. The only physical evidence that connected Roy Beck, Virginia Russell, and Virginia Russell's car was 6 Michelob Light beer bottles. Investigators had found 2 empty bottles next to the body, 3 empty bottles in Roy Beck's abandoned apartment, and 1 unopened bottle in the victim's car. If they could be shown to have come from the same six-pack, it would prove that Beck had been with Russell that night. But without usable fingerprints, linking the beer bottles seemed impossible. Anheuser-Busch distributes almost 200 million bottles of Michelob Light each year. Finding a connection between the 6 bottles seemed remote. Without it, Roy Beck would go free. To tie a murderer to his crime, detectives in South Carolina had the improbable task of proving that 6 bottles of beer came from the same six-pack. For help, they turned to the Anheuser-Busch bottling plant in Williamsburg, Virginia. In turn, Mark Landers, manager of quality assurance, relied on a coding system the company had adopted just that year.
The code in question was 17 October 96, and the other 4 characters were WF58.
The first part of the code showed that the beer was bottled on October 17, 1996. The W stood for the Williamsburg plant, and the F indicated a particular line within the system. The final part of the code, 58, specified that the beer was bottled during the 58th 15-minute increment on that day.
As the bottles are packaged and labeled, they are placed in 6-pack carriers and in a case. All of the bottles produced during a 15-minute time period will contain the same exact code.
In Landers' expert opinion, the beer bottles in Beck's house had come from the same carrying case as the bottles found near the victim. It was an irrefutable argument that locked Beck to his crime. Sought as a last-ditch effort, the beer bottles enabled detectives to piece together Virginia Russell's final hours with Beck. After leaving the hospital, her escort service sent her to Beck's home, where they drank the first 3 beers from the 6-pack. Police surmised that when Virginia stepped out of the room, Beck discovered the stash of money in her purse. Police theorized that they grabbed the beer and drove to a soccer field where they drank the 4th and 5th bottles. At some point, Beck decided that robbing his victim wasn't enough. He wanted to kill her. He shot her in the head, dragged her out of the car, and shot her twice more. He then drove away, abandoning her car within walking distance of his apartment. He left behind the final unopened beer, and with it, the clue that experts needed to link him to the crime.
I remember during the testimony, Beck's defense attorney listening to this testimony, putting his head in his hands and shaking as if he didn't know how to recover from this very damaging testimony that was occurring. And it was at that point I really felt good about the case and knew that we had Beck and he would probably be convicted.
By paying strict attention to the most banal of clues, detectives made sure that Beck would pay for his crime. He was sentenced to life in prison. Sometimes it's not the evidence that's so improbable, but rather the unlikely way in which it's found. In western Michigan, the cool, brisk current of the Muskegon River is a popular summer attraction for canoers, fishermen, and inner tubers. But in June of 1989, its peaceful waters divulged a violent secret. Two recreational divers were scavenging the river bottom for sunken treasure, dropped motors, lost fishing tackle, old anchors. A flash of metal told them they were onto something big, bigger than they thought. It was a red car, belly up in a 15-foot indentation, and there was something floating inside it. Peering through the windows, the divers saw the bloated figure of a human body. They contacted the police. As the car was removed from the water, authorities and spectators could only wonder at the identity of the body inside, how the car had gotten into the water, and for how long the river had concealed this dismal grave. A fully clothed woman was removed from the car. Despite having been submerged in water, the remains were well preserved. Investigators searched the body and the vehicle for identification, but all they found was mud, insect larvae, and cocoons. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office. In the meantime, investigators searched the area, trying to figure out how the car got into the river. The vehicle had little body damage. The nearby overpass showed no indication of a car accident. Galen Brookins, the chief of police from nearby Fremont, looked for other points of entry.
One of the theories that we had entertained was that it was possible for motor vehicles to come down this trail, which other vehicles obviously had, and to end up in the river at this point in a very straight trajectory.
The strong current had carried the car to the other side of the pilings, where it finally settled in a deep ditch. Because the car had landed in a deep ditch, it was impossible to see it from the surface. Detectives hoped that the autopsy would disclose the secrets that the river had kept hidden. The medical examiner had two tasks: to help identify the body and to find out how she died. Dental x-rays and fingerprints were taken in the hopes of giving a name to this Jane Doe. Head wounds pointed to the cause of death. This woman didn't die in a car accident. She had been struck at least 6 times with a hard, blunt object. The medical examiner could also determine that she was dead before she went into the river. Someone had tried to conceal her body by pushing her vehicle into the murky depths. While the autopsy was being performed, police ran a search on the vehicle identification number. They learned that the car belonged to David Smith, a nursing home employee who lived not far from the Muskegon River. The discovery of the car and disclosure of David Smith's name raised eyebrows at the nearby Fremont Police Department. 9 months earlier, on October 2nd, Smith had paid a visit to the station. He came to report his wife missing. At the time, police suspected nothing more than a typical domestic dispute and a spouse who was blowing off some steam.
He and his wife had a disagreement, and she had left on Friday evening, September 30th, and that he had not seen her since that time.
Smith told police that his 5-year marriage to Hai Yan, a Korean national, had turned sour. After their latest screaming match, she threw a plate at him, then climbed into her car and drove off.
After the officer had interviewed him, he had indicated that he should take and contact relatives and friends and try to determine if any of them had heard from her, and then report back to our department.
But months passed without any follow-up from David Smith, nor any sign of the missing woman or her car. When detectives checked up on Smith, they were surprised at what they found. Police learned from interviews with friends and family that Smith was hardly acting like a grieving spouse. Just 4 days after reporting his wife missing, he had filed for divorce. He'd been actively dating since and wasted no time in pawning Hai Yan's jewelry. Clearly, Smith didn't expect to hear from Hai Yan ever again. Though his behavior was suspicious, it was not illegal. The situation had all the ingredients of a homicide, except there was no body. Police were determined to find Hai Yan, dead or alive. In February 1989, 4 months before the body was recovered, Brookins turned to the Michigan State Police for help. State police worked the phones, contacting friends of the missing woman in the U.S. and Korea. No one had seen or heard from her since September. Now missing for 5 months, investigators were losing hope that Hai Yan would ever surface. As he proceeded with telephone interviews, Detective Richard Miller of the State Police uncovered a lie. Though David Smith told law enforcement that he had heard nothing from Hai Yan, he told several friends a different story.
Mr. Smith had made statements during her absence that he knew she was alive and well, that she had contact with some mutual friends and other parties.
But investigators found no one to confirm Smith's story, and he refused to take a lie detector test. Then, 5 months later, on the night of June 23rd, the suspect's car was pulled from the Muskegon River with a dead woman in it. The waiting was finally over. Having found the body, detectives secured a search warrant for David Smith's home, which he now shared with his new girlfriend. Technicians scoured the house, searching for the tiniest shred of evidence that might tell them whether a crime had happened here. The odds of finding anything were slim. But it had been almost a year since Hai Yan's disappearance. And there was no guarantee that this was even the scene of the crime. Investigators used an alternative light source to search for clues a killer wouldn't think to clean up. This searchlight penetrates paint layers, making it easy to find the remnants of blood. The beam highlighted some smears on a kitchen wall. And below them, police found what they were looking for. Behind a freezer, minute traces of blood spatter stained the wall.
The crime lab personnel further expanded their search in the immediate area, and by removing molding along the wall, we discovered a large area of contamination from human blood.
They believed this to be the scene of attack. From the pattern of the blood spatters, investigators were able to corroborate the medical examiner's findings. Someone had been beaten numerous times with a blunt object. From the amount of blood under the floor, it was likely that the person had been fatally wounded. But detectives faced a big problem. They were able to eliminate David as the source of the blood, but there were no records of Hai Yan's blood type. She had been in the water too long to determine it from her remains. DNA tests at the time also were not sensitive enough to be of use. Someone had been severely beaten in this kitchen, but detectives couldn't yet make an airtight case for murder. To arrest Smith, investigators needed some hard evidence to link him to Hai Yan's murder. In order to nail their suspect, police hoped to trap Smith in his own lies. He had told several people that he knew Hai Yan was alive as of January. If police could prove that she'd been in the water prior to then, they'd be able to prove that Smith had intentionally concealed the crime. But they had a major obstacle to overcome.
We were able to show the cause and manner of death, but we were not able to determine by her state of preservation exactly when she died.
Miller had an idea. He remembered that when the car was fished from the water, cocoons had been removed from the windshield and fender. He knew that insects are helpful in determining time of death on land. Could they do the same in the water? In order to tie David Smith to his wife's death, detectives in western Michigan needed to determine how long her body had been in the river. Their only clue was a cocoon. Police turned to forensic entomologist Richard Merritt to see if he could learn anything from this unlikely witness.
Well, when I received the specimens from Detective Miller, I saw that they were black flies. And black flies are a group that I've been working on for the past 20 years. So I knew right away that there was something there that I could identify and probably give some more information that they didn't have on the case.
Merritt would rely on his knowledge of the black fly's life cycle to calculate when the car hit the water. Like all insects, the black fly goes through 4 life stages. The first stage is the egg. Black flies in the Muskegon River hatch in November or December, then turn into worm-like larvae.
The larval black flies remain in that stage and grow during the winter in the river on any substrates that they can attach to. Could be leaves, could be rocks, or in this case it was a car.
In April or May, the larvae enter the pupal stage. They build cocoons around themselves and remain dormant until late May or early June, when they emerge as adult flies to start the life cycle over again. The presence of cocoons on High-Eon's car told Merritt that the vehicle had to have entered the water no later than November.
For that particular species to be found on the car in late June as it was, the immature stage had to occur for the entire winter on the car in the river. Otherwise, you would not have had that particular species.
Merritt's findings proved to Detective Miller that David Smith had completely fabricated the stories about his wife's whereabouts since her disappearance. He'd said she was seen in January. The cocoons said she'd been in the water since November.
Mr. Smith had told co-workers and others that he knew his wife was alive and that she had contact with various people across the nation. Dr. Merritt's studies of the black fly larva and the various stages we found on the vehicle proved positively that was simply not true, that she was immersed within the waters of the Muskegon River.
The insects proved that Smith was lying, no doubt to cover his tracks. And apparently, his weren't the only set. When news of the murder investigation came out, a co-worker told police that a month before High-Eon's disappearance, David had been trying to find a hitman. Police subpoenaed Smith's phone records. In September, there was an unusually high number of calls to 2 numbers in Pittsburgh. One was the dry cleaning plant where his father worked. The other was traced to the home of one of the father's co-workers, Kenny Lamont Latimer. When investigators confronted Latimer with the evidence heaping against his acquaintance David Smith, Latimer crumbled. He told police that Smith had offered him $5,000 to kill his wife. By the time he'd hired Latimer, Smith's marriage was a wreck. But he was already paying alimony to a first wife and didn't want another liability. He hired Latimer to kill the victim with a dose of bad heroin. But the plan didn't work, so Smith beat her to death with a wooden statue. Smith and Latimer then put her into her car and pushed it into the river. Thanks to the unlikely testimony of a vacant cocoon, Smith was arrested in December of 1989. A jury found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 to 20 years in prison. For their parts in the murder and conspiracy, Kenny Lamont Latimer received 20 to 60 years, and Smith's father got 3.5 to 5. The improbable testimony of the Black Fly foiled David Smith's plot to cover up the murder of his wife. In Dana Point, California, detectives would rely on more improbable evidence to link a killer to his actions. For years, 46-year-old Janet Overton, a public official, had suffered from declining health. Though dizzy and weak, she was determined not to let illness keep her down. On a January morning in 1988, she looked forward to a family outing on the Pacific Ocean. She never made it past the driveway. Janet's husband, Richard, summoned paramedics. But Janet was beyond help. Within hours, she was dead. The autopsy that followed could do nothing to shed light on the cause of Janet Overton's death. A routine scan of her blood and tissues was performed in order to find commonly used substances. It eliminated all conventional over-the-counter or prescription drugs as having contributed to her death. Her strange illness seemed to be as much of a mystery in death as it had been in life. For 4 years, Overton suffered from weight loss, stomach aches, tingling in her fingers, and a rust-colored rash. None of the specialists could make a diagnosis, despite extensive testing for viral infections, allergies, bacterial problems, anything that could explain the strange illness. Toxicologist Paul Sedgwick was called in.
They were completely baffled. They checked right and left. There are stacks of records, a couple feet high, and from whatever I can see, they never did find a specific cause for any of the symptoms that they found.
All they knew was that Janet Overton had been ravaged from the inside out. After her death, blood and tissue samples were put into storage at the coroner's office. The body was cremated. Her death might have remained a medical curiosity, but then a tip phoned in to Lieutenant Tim Carney of the Orange County Sheriff's Department turned it into a homicide investigation. 6 months after Janet Overton's demise, Richard Overton's first wife, Dorothy, told officers to take a good look at her ex-husband's past. Her daughter had made an odd discovery while visiting Overton's home. While going through some of Richard's things, she found a syringe, rubber gloves, and a tube of mascara. She reported them to her mother, who contacted the police. Carney dug through 20 years of records to uncover the Overton's family secret.
Dorothy Boyer told us that after her divorce from her husband around 1967, that there was a series of years where she suspected her husband had been poisoning her.
Like the second Mrs. Overton, Dorothy's health declined between 1967 and 1973. She would become violently ill without explanation. She was dizzy. Her mouth tasted of metal. One day, she noticed a strong sulfuric smell coming from her shampoo. The same odor emanated from some of her food. She began to suspect that Richard, who had access to her house even after their divorce, was trying to kill her. To find out for sure, she laid a trap. With the help of the Sheriff's Department, Richard Overton's first wife, Dorothy, devised a plan to see if he was poisoning her. She cleaned a new coffee can with rubbing alcohol, then marked the lid so that she would know if it had been tampered with. The rest would be up to Richard. After 3 days, she discovered that someone had opened the lid. Fingerprints lifted from the can were compared to Richard's, taken when he applied for a municipal job. They matched. Without his ex-wife's permission, Richard Overton had snuck into her house, gone into the cupboards, and mixed some reddish powder into her coffee. When the contents were tested, investigators discovered a strong-smelling mineral called selenium. Selenium is an element which in small amounts is necessary for good nutrition and health. In large amounts, it's poisonous. Richard was brought in for questioning. He initially denied having poisoned Dorothy, but confronted with the evidence, he confessed. Dorothy agreed to drop the charges so long as Richard stayed out of her life. Now, 20 years later, Richard Overton faced another round of questions regarding the poisoning of his second wife, Janet. But before detectives could go after him, they needed to find out if selenium poisoning had contributed to the death of Janet Overton. On paper, the two Mrs. Overtons seemed to have suffered from the same undiagnosed ailment. According to Lieutenant Carney, it looked like history was repeating itself.
What we looked at was comparing Dorothy Boyer's 1970, late 60s, early 70s medical history from doctors, along with Janet Overton's medical history in the 1980s. And what we saw was almost a mirror copy of symptomology of classic heavy metal poisoning.
Dorothy Boyer, and now police, wondered if the mascara Richard's daughter found in his home contained selenium. In one simple test for selenium, the questioned sample is dissolved in a test tube. Hydrochloric acid and other chemicals are added. If the solution turns red, that indicates that selenium is present. Tests on the mascara showed it contained selenium. Detectives contacted the mascara manufacturer. Selenium, they learned, is not an ingredient in any of their cosmetics. If it was found in the product, it had to have been added after it was purchased. If high quantities of the mineral could also be detected in samples from the victim's body, investigators would have a solid foundation in their case against Richard Overton. To investigators' dismay, no abnormal amount of selenium was found in any of the victim's tissue samples. The investigation halted in its tracks. But it wouldn't be shut down for long, thanks to a lucky discovery in the lab. From the open vial of Janet Overton's stomach contents, Sedgwick was overpowered by the smell of bitter almonds, the signature of a far deadlier poison than selenium.
And I knew instantly that there was cyanide from even 2 feet away.
Only 50% of the population are genetically predisposed to smell cyanide. And because the original testing was done under a fuming hood, the smell was easy to miss. Had it not been for Sedgwick's chance discovery, it's likely that the cyanide would have stayed hidden forever.
We didn't detect cyanide initially because it's one of the less common compounds that we see. It requires special testing and is not in the general screens that are initially called for.
Sedgwick determined that Janet Overton's blood, brain, and stomach samples contained cyanide. Even a small dose of the white powder can be lethal. 1 year after Janet Overton's demise, her cause of death was ruled acute cyanide poisoning. To Detective Carney, Richard Overton appeared to be the most likely suspect. But poisoning cases are notoriously hard to solve. Forensics can be used to identify the deadly toxin, but are of little help in tying the poisoner to the body. Lieutenant Carney knew that he had an uphill battle.
Proving a poison case can be difficult when time goes by. You still need to look at the aspects of the investigation, which include not only physical evidence, and we're talking about years of poisoning here, and also you have to look at motive and opportunity.
And so far, investigators had found neither. It was true that Richard Overton had a history of tampering, but in person, he hardly seemed the murderous sort. He was a bright, accomplished man who had nothing to gain from his wife's death. There was no financial motive. Janet's life insurance policy had been paid out to her son. Nor was there a history of violence. The 15-year marriage was loving and supportive, Richard said. At first, detectives didn't let on that they knew about his attempts to poison his first wife. They simply asked Richard who might have tried to poison Janet. He mentioned that his wife had enemies, stemming back to her involvement in local politics. Janet had also struggled with depression. He couldn't rule out the possibility that she had killed herself. Then, 5 hours into the interview, police dropped the bombshell.
I confronted him with the 1973 investigation where he poisoned his former wife. He denied that to me until I showed him the documentation of the report.
Challenged by his shady past, Overton abruptly ended the conversation and refused to contribute any further to the investigation. Detectives had caught Overton in a bold-faced lie. During an interview with a business associate, Mel Hubbard, they caught him in another. Overton had told detectives that he had no access to cyanide. Hubbard told a conflicting story.
Mr. Hubbard informed us that, in fact, he does use cyanide in the extraction of gold and silver from ore samples in his mining operations, and he keeps cyanide on hand at his residence. Mr. Hubbard also informed me that Richard had keys to his residence and would care for his home when Hubbard was away during his mining operations.
Discovering that Richard had had access to cyanide was like putting him in the same room with the murder weapon. To place that weapon firmly in his grip, detectives would need to find motive. Without it, they'd have little chance of getting this case to court, and even less of a chance of a conviction. Armed with a search warrant, sheriffs descended on the suspect's home. They seized Richard's diaries, along with his computer, and 131 diskettes. Richard's children had told investigators that he kept a voluminous diary. First, he'd write notes longhand, and then he'd type more detailed versions into his computer. Finding some confession in the suspect's own words would be detectives' last chance at making their case. Careful inspection showed that some of the writing had been manipulated. Entries had been whited out. The page corresponding to the date of Janet's death had been removed. By using an ultraviolet light to see through the whiteout, investigators learned that Richard suspected Janet of having an affair. There was the possible motive, but investigators needed more to prove it. Detectives hoped to find answers in Richard's computer files. They spent hours scouring the hard drive and opening diskette after diskette, but they came up empty-handed. It seemed that Richard had erased or written over almost all of his electronic diary. But then, detectives noticed something strange. At the bottom of one of the documents were a few jumbled lines of text. And in the text were phrases that suggested diary entries. Perhaps the data wasn't gone after all. But how to retrieve it from the computer? Detectives in Orange County, California, believed that Richard Overton's computer would tie him to the poisoning death of his wife, Janet. But Overton had erased his hard drive and diskettes.
Does this allow us to print?
Data retrieval experts were called in to launch the first forensic computer probe in Orange County history. Though Overton had cleansed files, computer experts like William Riddle knew that there was a good chance the information was still on the computer.
What most people don't know is that once you delete a file off a computer or a disk, and the information that was in the file actually are still there on the computer. It's just that the computer has turned a small flag or a character and has told the table of contents section of the computer that this space is now available for storage. So something can be overwritten in this space.
Inside a computer, media is stored in files as magnetic information. Sometimes that information overlaps. The process is like typing and retyping over the same sheet of paper. Riddle began his work by copying all of Overton's computer files. This way, he wouldn't risk losing the data for good during his investigation. He installed a specialized computer program on their systems, then set about the grueling process of opening files one at a time. The program removes layers of text, leaving behind bits and pieces of documents that were once stored there. It took hundreds of hours to expose the raw, unformatted tangle of text, but that was only the beginning. Using the handwritten diary as a reference, technicians then sorted through the files, piecing together Richard Overton's diary word by word. From the jumble, technicians were finally able to reassemble Richard Overton's secret diary, and with it, his intention to kill his wife. The recovery of Overton's damning words would prove to be a turning point in the case. Though the suspect had proclaimed that he and the victim had a loving marriage, his own words, pulled from electronic oblivion, would prove otherwise.
In fact, there was a point in the discs where Richard Overton stated that his love-hate relationship for his wife had turned purely to hate, and that something was going to happen very soon. This was just a few short days before her death on January 24th.
Investigators surmised that Richard was angry about his wife's infidelity and resentful that she'd achieved political success without a formal education. As he had done with his first wife, he added selenium to his wife's beauty products and food to set up a long-term illness. At some point, he'd stopped giving her the selenium and it cleared from her body. Then, he administered a single lethal dose of cyanide to kill her. He thought that no one would ever be able to catch him. And he was nearly right. Had it not been for his own writings, detectives would have had only their suspicions. After years of investigation, they now had both motive and opportunity. The information retrieved from the computer disks convinced a jury that Richard Overton had plotted for years to kill his wife. After only 6 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even in the wasteland of computer files, beer bottles, and insect cocoons, a keen investigator can find a murder conviction. The most pivotal clues are sometimes waiting to be uncovered from the most unlikely sources.
In 1996, a pair of convicted felons escaped across the country. When a foreign military officer disappeared along their trail, authorities wondered if the armed fugitives had become killers. The FBI raced to find the escapees before more victims crossed their path.
In Alabama, two desperate criminals fled the custody of a local deputy. Eluding authorities, they made their way across the country in a wave of car theft, abduction, and murder. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Escaped criminals believe they have nothing to lose. They'll do anything to avoid capture. After the convicts claimed their first victim, further bloodshed was inevitable, unless the FBI could find them and bring them to justice.
Central Alabama, May 21st, 1996. A DeKalb County deputy was assigned to transport 3 inmates from state prisons to face court dates. Michael Thompson was to be sentenced for murder.
What it is, I always.
The deputy knew Thompson, having transported him before.
When they putting you back up there for this?
Thompson had persuaded the deputy to let him sit in the front seat. Thompson had just met another inmate, Roger Yaden. The career criminal had 17 burglary convictions and 3 prison escapes on his record. The third inmate was on work release. The prisoners were not handcuffed for the short drive. As the group neared Talladega, Alabama, Thompson made his move. At gunpoint, Thompson forced the deputy to keep driving.
Keep him quiet. Take it easy.
He ordered him to drive to a secluded area in the woods near Lincoln, Alabama.
Open the door. Up.
Thompson and Yaden freed themselves. They marched their hostages into the woods.
Keep walking, speak cool with it, man. Take your clothes off. Go. Strip. Go.
The men forced the deputy and the other inmate to strip out of their clothes.
Shut up. The shoes, too.
The deputy's extra handcuff key fell unnoticed to the ground.
Sit down. Sit down. Sit down.
Bound in the remote woods, the officer didn't know if he would be executed.
Right, hurry up. Grab the clothes. Let's go.
It's all right, I'll be riding with you again.
Thanks.
The 2 escapees simply ran off.
Have anything to do with us, man?
Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden took off in the direction of Talladega, leaving their prison clothes behind. It was Yaden's 4th escape from Alabama authorities. The deputy had to contact the sheriff's department. With a dropped handcuff key, he freed himself and the other inmate, then ran for help.
Get out.
The escaped convicts had the deputy's service weapon and a shotgun stored in the patrol car. Under the cover of law officers, the two felons endangered anyone in their path. The deputy and the remaining inmate had flagged down a motorist and reached the local police department.
Problem is, push my head against the window.
Police immediately issued an urgent be on the lookout alert for the two escapees in the stolen patrol car.
One individual, Thompson, 6 foot.
DeKalb County law enforcement launched a search. But the area contained hundreds of miles of rural roads. Despite the search, no sightings of the fugitives or the deputy's car came in that day.
Okay, let's start with the description of the man who had the
It wasn't until the evening that authorities received their first clue to Thompson's and Yaden's actions. A local paramedic contacted Talladega City Police and told them about his ordeal. He said that earlier that day, he was driving near Talladega when he noticed a sheriff's patrol car following him. When he heard the siren, the off-duty paramedic pulled over. He believed it was a routine stop. The officer asked for his license and wallet. Paramedic Bob Gortney didn't think he'd been speeding.
The reason we pulled you over is your vehicle fits the description of a vehicle that was involved in a hit and run. And I told him, well, I haven't been in any accident. You know, you can check my truck, you can look around, there's not a scratch on it. And he said, well, your truck fits the description that we've gotten, so we're going to, check it out.
Gortney didn't suspect anything.
No flags went off when he first walked up to me because he was in full uniform, had the badge and the name tag, and I really didn't make contact with the whole uniform. I seen the gun when he had his hand on it.
Gortney gave the deputy his paramedic badge number, asking him to call in to verify his identity. But the deputy refused. Following the deputy's orders, the paramedic got into the patrol car. He believed it was simply a misunderstanding and that he would be released shortly.
He said, well, we're going to carry you back over here to the accident scene. And I said, well, that's fine, my truck doesn't fit the description, and we'll just get this cleared up.
He first realized something was wrong when a man in civilian clothes carrying a shotgun ran from the patrol car to his truck.
Okay, let's start with the man approaching.
From the description, police believe the man driving the pickup was Roger Yaden. They believe Michael Thompson was the one dressed as the deputy. Thompson followed the pickup with the paramedic locked in the back.
What the deal is, you can have the truck.
Gortney asked for an explanation.
Keep it quiet.
He said, we're just going to take your truck. And I knew right then it was a kidnapping. These guys just kidnapped me. So I went into the pleading mode, I told him, I said, look, I'm only 30 years old. I've got a wife and kids, and you have my truck, you have my gun. There's no sense in killing me.
Michael Thompson followed behind to an isolated spot off the highway. Roger Yaden had found the paramedic's 9mm handgun in the truck. Bob Gortney was helpless in the patrol car's locked back seat.
What up? Hi, man. Hey, come on in.
The men forced him inside the cruiser's trunk. The kidnapped paramedic believed they were going to kill him.
I was laying there at the point, so if they shot through the trunk, I knew they would miss me. If a bullet was to come through, maybe it would graze me and not hit any vital organs, so I was trying to protect myself from the point of being shot through the trunk. And I could hear vehicles pass by, and then I heard my truck crank, and then I heard it sped off, and it was hot. I felt like I was suffocating. I kept thinking to myself, you need to slow down, because if you don't, you're going to use up all your energy, and plus it's hot in here, I'm going to dehydrate, and I'm probably going to pass out. I was scared. I was shaking, and I was laying in the trunk, and I got to thinking, okay, you're a paramedic. You've extricated people 1,000 times. Now it's time for you to do what you've learned to get yourself out of this trunk, to extricate yourself so you can still be alive.
Using a jack he found in the trunk, Courtney worked for 2 hours. Finally, he popped the trunk open. He ran to the nearest house where a woman called police.
Can you just sit there for a minute, enjoy coffee, and try to warm up? I'll be right with you.
An updated bulletin was issued for the pair of fugitives in the black pickup truck they were now driving.
232 to all units. This is a broadcast for 0900 suspect.
They were armed with 2 9mm handguns and a shotgun.
Armed and dangerous.
Authorities sped to the main interstate, figuring the fugitives would use it to flee the area. With a stolen truck full of gas and interstate highways nearby, law officers knew that Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden had a big lead on them. They could be anywhere. 7 days later and 1,200 miles away, an abandoned black pickup truck with no license plates turned up in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The vehicle identification number on the dash had been destroyed. But police located a second identification number on the truck's chassis. A record search showed that it was the paramedics' truck stolen in Alabama. Because of the interstate travel, the FBI was notified. An immediate search of the area revealed no sign of Michael Thompson or Roger Yaden. The armed fugitives had dumped the one vehicle investigators could trace. On June 7th, 1996, the FBI in Birmingham, Alabama, filed a warrant for unlawful flight to avoid confinement. Police agencies across the country were notified to watch for any sign of Yaden and Thompson. 2 weeks later, 1,200 miles east of where the paramedics' stolen truck was recovered in New Mexico, a group of diving students spotted a car at the bottom of Fowler Lake near Terre Haute, Indiana. Indiana Department of Natural Resources agent Dean Jenkins responded with his team.
The car was laying, it was in about 25, 30 foot of water. It was on its top. The windshield had been broke out from when it sank. It apparently was driven off the ramp.
Indiana Department of Natural Resources officers dove into the lake to investigate. They found a red car with no license plates. Divers could see items from the vehicle, including traveler's checks resting on the bottom. There was no body nearby.
The degree of personal items we found and what they were, traveler's checks, those kind of things that would ordinarily you would think would be stolen or discarded along the way prior to someone just dumping a stolen car. I think that was the key thing that made me wonder what else was involved with this vehicle.
Investigators removed the car to process it on shore. In the trunk, technicians recovered a British passport for Army Major David Nichols. Traveler's checks and airline ticket stubs issued to the Major were found in the glove compartment. Among the items was an Alabama jail booking slip with a local Indiana name and address written on the back. Checking the car's identification number, investigators discovered it was a rental from Colorado, reported missing along with the Major 16 days after he had rented it.
VIN number is 726JJ6.
Because a foreign military officer was the likely victim of a crime, Supervisory Special Agent Jack Osborne from the FBI field office in Indianapolis was called in. He believed the name on the Alabama jail booking slip was the best lead in Major Nichols' disappearance.
From the booking slip that was found in the car, on the backside was several handwritten notes, not so much with phone numbers, but maybe somebody's first name and an address. One of those names and address led us to a relative of Mr. Yaden who resided in Terre Haute.
The relative was an aunt of Roger Yaden's. He was one of 2 escaped convicts whom investigators had searched for in New Mexico. She told an agent that she did not know why her name was on the back of the Alabama jail booking slip. She also had no knowledge of Major Nichols, his red rental car, or that her nephew had escaped custody.
She told us that she did have a nephew, Roger Dale Yaden, who she believed was in custody in Alabama and had communicated a lot with him in writing as her children had.
She did say that Yaden had some old friends in the area, but she couldn't recall their names. If Roger Yaden had made it to Indiana, the FBI believed murderer Michael Thompson was with him. They knew the pair of escaped convicts had already threatened to kill 3 others in Alabama and were last seen with 2 handguns and a shotgun. Agents feared that Roger Yaden and Michael Thompson may have used one of those weapons on the missing British major. In June of 1996, the FBI and Indiana police searched for armed fugitives Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden, who had escaped from Alabama authorities. They were considered prime suspects in the disappearance of British Army Major David Nichols, whose rental car was found at the bottom of an Indiana lake. According to FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jack Osborne, an Alabama jail booking slip found inside the car linked the fugitives to the missing major.
The evidence certainly associated that vehicle with our missing major, and that he was not in and around Terre Haute, nor was he located in the lake. It likewise then identified our 2 escaped prisoners that we believed were together and did have possession of the British Army officer's car, and that they still possibly could be in the Terre Haute area.
Agents went to the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. to find out more about the major's travel itinerary.
Sent to us prior to his arrival.
The FBI needed to determine where and when Major Nichols may have crossed paths with the armed fugitives.
The British government provided us some very basic information that indicated a British Army officer of theirs had been in the United States, arriving on the 20th of May, arrived at Denver, and was to travel to New Mexico to attend a language school, and then to Texas to attend a second school.
On travel orders issued by NATO, Major David Nichols was scheduled to arrive at the first seminar in Albuquerque on May 26th. Nichols was a vice commander of the British Defense School of Languages, an expert linguist fluent in 5 languages. He told his wife and 3 children that he planned to sightsee for a few days before the seminar. But school officials in Albuquerque never heard from the major after he failed to arrive.
The FBI felt it was strange that the British Army officer had not attended school. The British government likewise, through contact they had with the family and friends of the missing major, felt that it was strange that he had not been in contact with them, which then caused the British government great concern.
Agent Osborne contacted the FBI field office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Special Agent John Shum needed to determine where the major was last seen in the 450 miles between Denver and Albuquerque.
They gave us his itinerary, photos, descriptions, potential contacts here in the U.S. that he might have contacted once we couldn't find him where he was supposed to be. So they gave us a complete, what we would call a victimology of him, his background, personality.
Agents also checked the British Major's credit card purchases.
Hey, how you doing?
The last time he used his card was to buy gas in the small town of Raton on the Colorado-New Mexico border.
Can I take a look at it, please?
The gas station was just 150 miles from the place Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden, the escaped fugitives from Alabama, had abandoned the black pickup truck they had stolen.
FBI?
Agents wanted to confirm how far the British Major had traveled past Raton.
Yes, please.
They checked at a hotel in Old Town Albuquerque where the Major had made advance reservations. He never showed up, and his reservation was never canceled. The Major had disappeared somewhere between the gas station near the Colorado border, where his credit card had been used, and the hotel in Albuquerque. The FBI suspected Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden had abducted him, but they had vanished too. Agent Shum called the Major's wife in England to find out more about how her husband may have reacted if accosted by two desperate criminals.
She told me he was a very gentle man. He was a very good man, and that if he was confronted with by these people, that he would not have been confrontational. He would have been willing to do what they say, give them anything they want, just to avoid a confrontation. And she said that he would have been very concerned about his safety and being able to make it back to England to help raise his boys.
1,200 miles away in Indiana, close to the lake where the Major's car was found, local police received a call from a junkyard manager who reported seeing two suspicious men on his property. When the officer arrived, the two men fled from a pickup truck loaded with scrap metal. It was unsafe for a lone officer to follow two men into the woods. He called in the truck's license plate numbers and learned the vehicle had been stolen. Crime scene technicians processed the truck. They found a tag from a video camera strap that belonged to Major David Nichols. They also recovered a letter that was addressed to fugitive Roger Yaden's mother in Alabama.
And it was generally saying that he was out of prison and was generally going to be staying in the Terre Haute area.
When agents contacted Yaden's mother in Alabama, she said she hadn't heard from her son and had no idea where he might be.
No, things are going fine.
Investigators were sure the fugitives were nearby.
We've got both your photographs.
The items that were recovered in that truck were extremely important because it not only associated Yaden and Thompson with that vehicle, it also associated the missing Major with that vehicle.
It was more compelling evidence that Yaden and Thompson were likely responsible for the Major's disappearance. But the armed fugitives were moving fast, and the FBI was still one step behind. In the summer of 1996, the FBI continued their hunt for escaped Alabama convicts Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden. Agents suspected they had carjacked a British man who was still missing, then dumped his rental car in a lake near Terre Haute, Indiana, where Roger Yaden had relatives. At a nearby high school, the FBI and Indiana investigators had established a satellite command post. They received a court order to examine Yaden's local juvenile record.
Because we might very well need support.
They noticed that Yaden often got into trouble with one particular friend. Checking the friend's background, they learned that he managed a nearby auto salvage yard. Indianapolis FBI Special Agent William Hamilton would chase the lead.
My partner and I decided that we would drive a unmarked vehicle into this area in an undercover capacity under the ruse of looking for a specific auto part.
The 5-acre property was a good hiding place. It was filled with a maze of cars surrounded by dense woods. Agents staked out the location.
I just haven't seen anything in a while. It's just not moving.
They needed to confirm that Yaden's childhood friend was on duty. In order to assure their identities would not be discovered, they left their badges and weapons in their vehicle.
After going all the way to the far south end of the salvage yard, we noticed a trailer back in the woods, and there was 2 white males there working.
The men fit the general description of the armed fugitives, but the unarmed agents could not be sure.
Hello.
They hoped to learn more from the manager.
You get a lot of stuff here.
The undercover agents engaged him in small talk and confirmed that he was a friend of Roger Yaden's.
The childhood friend, he indicated that he'd known Yaden for several years. They had both came to his residence in early June, and they showed up there in a red Taurus.
That car matched the description of the missing Major's vehicle. By the time the agents finished their conversation, the 2 men they had glimpsed earlier were gone. The FBI believed those 2 men had been Thompson and Yaden. After assembling an arrest team, agents and local officers raced back to the salvage yard.
I think we're doing all right. I don't think he's very...
On the way, they noticed a pickup speeding in the opposite direction.
That's him.
One agent spotted Roger Yaden inside, traveling with the salvage yard manager. They couldn't see if Michael Thompson was also with them. Investigators gave chase. They trailed the truck to a dead end. Yaden jumped out and headed for the woods. The fugitive's childhood friend was detained for questioning. He said Yaden had forced him to lead police on a chase until he could jump out of the truck. Assured he had not intentionally harbored the suspects, police later released the friend.
The childhood friend knew nothing of their recent criminal behavior. He had only knew that Yaden had been in jail once for burglary.
Roger Yaden had eluded pursuing investigators. A canine unit was called in to track him. The highly trained dog picked up a scent.
Mike. Mike. Mike.
On July 2nd, 1996, Roger Yaden decided he was finished running. But his accomplice, convicted murderer Michael Thompson, was still at large. Having Yaden in custody was only a partial victory, according to FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne.
After Yaden's arrest, this is not over at all. We know that we're now dealing with another fugitive, maybe the worst of the 2 fugitives. We do not know where he's at. If he's still on the property, if he's in the trailer, if he's in the woods, if he has a weapon or not.
Come out with your hands up.
Suspecting Michael Thompson took refuge in the auto salvage yard's trailer. Law enforcement teams surrounded it.
Thompson, this is Special Agent Hamilton with the FBI. You are surrounded. I repeat, with the FBI.
They ordered him to come out unarmed.
You are surrounded. This is a warning. We We are going
Agents
to
warned
fire
anyone inside that the
gas.
trailer would be
Come
tear
out
gassed.
with your hands up. Again, I repeat, we are going to fire tear gas.
There was no
Come
response.
out with your hands up.
The atmosphere was very tense. We did not know if Thompson was inside the trailer with maybe a long gun or even a handgun, positioned on some of our people. So we had to maintain cover all around the perimeter of the trailer.
Come out with your hands up. You will not be harmed.
Authorities gave the signal to use the gas. They stormed the trailer. No one knew if escaped murderer Michael Thompson was armed and barricaded inside.
Mr. Thompson, I repeat, Mr. Thompson, you need to come out.
On July 2nd, 1996, after capturing Alabama fugitive Roger Yaden in Indiana, FBI agents stormed a salvage yard trailer where they believed his partner was hiding. But Indiana Department of Natural Resources agent Dean Jenkins and his team did not find convicted killer Michael Thompson inside.
That was a terrible disappointment because we figured we were on to him. We caught one, we were looking to get the other one and pretty much make it a clean sweep, and he wasn't in there.
Agents questioned the salvage yard manager, a childhood friend of Yaden's who had unknowingly harbored the fugitives. He said he had no idea where Thompson might be hiding, but he did show agents where Yaden and Thompson kept their belongings. From the trunk of a car, agents retrieved a suitcase labeled with the name of missing British Major David Nichols. The Major's clothes and personal effects were still inside. Agents believed the fugitives had carjacked the Major in New Mexico. The search team secured a 3-mile perimeter around the salvage yard and told the man to call immediately if he spotted Thompson.
We used canines and broke up into teams of 3 and 4 officers with canines and searched the area, ran tracks all throughout the lot, the salvage yard area, and then the surrounding woods looking for him, and that took an awfully long time. That went from the time they inserted the gas in the afternoon well past darkness.
With a convicted killer on the loose, FBI and local law enforcement could not afford to wait. They patrolled roadways and fields, hoping to flush Thompson from hiding. Despite hours of searching, the fugitive had eluded them once again.
Yeah, the smoke all came in this way, so.
Markings on the outside.
In the morning, agents considered the possibility that Thompson may have somehow slipped past the perimeter. They had no way of knowing if he was still in the immediate area.
Miss Hamilton.
Then Special Agent William Hamilton got the call they were hoping for.
All right, good. Listen, don't go near him. We're going to be there.
On July the 3rd, the morning following the arrest of Roger Yaden, the childhood friend of Yaden telephoned me and advised me that the subject, Thompson, was asleep in the junkyard in the back of one of the cars near his residence, the trailer.
The team was concerned that Thompson would be armed. There was no telling what the desperate fugitive would do when cornered. Exhausted from running, the killer gave up without a fight.
Hands up, hands up.
After 43 days, 6,000 miles, and thousands of man-hours, the last fugitive wanted in Major Nichols' disappearance was in custody. Thompson refused to talk to investigators. But Roger Yaden, apprehended the day before, felt differently. Hoping for leniency from federal authorities, Yaden agreed to tell investigators what they wanted to know.
We also need a new car. We need to ditch the pickup.
FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne led the questioning.
Got about $200.
Yes. All right. We only have one.
He indicated a willingness to give us a statement, to provide all of the information that he and Thompson were involved in, to include the initial escape, to include the carjacking in Alabama. And this is the first time that we learned that the British Army officer had been killed.
In the black pickup the pair had carjacked from Alabama, the fugitives made their way to New Mexico, selling tools from the truck for money. When their cash ran out, they decided to rob and carjack another victim. They staked out a remote rest area 100 miles south of Raton, New Mexico, the last known town where British Major Nichols had traveled. The convicts figured that tourists would be traveling with a lot of money and waited for someone who was traveling alone. That's when the British Major pulled up. As they had done in Alabama, they forced their victim into the trunk of the car. Thompson drove the Major's rental car, while Yaden followed in the truck. From Yaden's account, the British Major reacted to the crime as the Major's wife had predicted he would, according to Special Agent John Shum.
Everything she said about him is exactly what Yaden told us happened, that Major Nichols was non-confrontational. He did what he could to keep the situation from escalating. He talked about his 3 boys in England, about how he needed to get back there for them, and he asked that he not be hurt because he was concerned about what would happen to his children.
Nothing to do with it. I was in the pickup truck. I was in the back.
Yaden said Thompson had planned the whole thing and that he was calling the shots. They drove 50 miles until it was dark, then pulled into a deserted area off the highway. At gunpoint, Thompson forced Major Nichols out of the trunk. Without warning, he shot him in the back of the head. Thompson turned the Major over and shot again. They hid his body at the site, then abandoned the pickup truck several miles away. Yaden said Thompson never explained why he had killed this carjacking victim.
You didn't have to kill him.
The pair of fugitives drove Major Nichols' car to Indiana, where they dumped it in Fowler Lake.
Tell us about the gun.
Roger Yaden had confessed his crimes to the FBI, but he wanted a deal before he gave up the location of Major Nichols' body.
He wanted to hold back until he could get some assurance from the government that we would not seek the death penalty against him. If that occurred, then he was willing to help us find the body of the missing Major if we had not located the body already.
All right, so let's talk about this deal. What are you looking for here?
Agents met with Yaden and his lawyer.
What kind of time are you talking about?
The prisoner said he would tell them where the body was if they also promised he would not serve time in an Alabama state prison.
We need to know.
Initial searches without his help turned up nothing. FBI Special Agent John Shum was worried the Major's body would not be found without Yaden's help.
I don't follow this. What is the deal?
The most important thing for us to do was find Major Nichols' body. That was going to be important to be successful in any prosecution, and it was important for us because it was the right thing to do. Since we couldn't make him safe in this country, since we couldn't guarantee his safety, at least we could return his body to his family.
So, what are we going to get out of this? You think you're asking for a federal facility?
Federal prosecutors agreed to the deal.
It's all written out.
What are you looking
Yaden led investigators to a secluded spot in the New Mexico wilderness. The prisoner was an accomplished escape artist, having fled custody more than once.
Well, we were very concerned about that because he had escaped 4 times before in Alabama. He was obviously very good at that. Plus, we had to be concerned about our own safety. So not only did we focus on the mission of finding Major Nichols' body, but we had to be very, very concerned about making sure Roger Yaden was not trying to deceive us and just using this as a ruse to set up an escape attempt.
FBI field agents were wary as a SWAT team secured the location. They had no way of knowing if Yaden might have friends in the area waiting to strike at agents. On September 24th, 1996, recaptured prisoner Roger Yaden led the FBI into the New Mexico desert, where he claimed the body of Major David Nichols remained hidden after being murdered. Yaden would be spared the death penalty if he could locate the remains. FBI Special Agent John Shum recalls that the likelihood of finding the body without Yaden's help was slim.
It was a very desolate area. It was off of a very little used 2-lane highway in New Mexico in a very remote area. And then off this 2-lane highway, we had to go down a gravel road for approximately a mile. And then off the gravel road, we had to drive into a cattle pasture for several hundred yards. So it was incredibly remote.
Agents were concerned that Yaden had taken them there as a ruse to effect another escape. Finally, Yaden pointed out a spot to the agents.
There it is.
And even Yaden himself seemed very somber and respectful of the situation we were in, that we had finally located this man's body and we're going to be able to give him a proper resting place now.
Didn't you say something about
exposure to the elements made identification impossible. Examiners took dental x-rays, which were later matched to records sent from England.
Right.
Major Nichols' family in Britain was notified. The officer's murderer, Michael Thompson, avoided a possible death sentence by pleading guilty in federal court to carjacking and murdering a foreign official. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. For kidnapping, robbery, and escape in Alabama, Thompson received 5 additional life sentences. In exchange for his cooperation, Roger Yaden was allowed to plead guilty to only 1 count of carjacking and was sentenced to 18 years. Yaden was afraid of Alabama state prison. As part of his deal, he was to serve his sentence in a federal facility.
Yaden, time to get up.
He was temporarily held at a county jail in Las Vegas, New Mexico, until he could be transferred.
Yaden! Let's go. Hey, get up. Come on, get up.
Remarkably, Roger Yaden had escaped again. 2 other inmates also made the breakout with Yaden. The search party with a dog team tracked Yaden's scent from jail, but the trail ended at an interstate highway. Later that day, authorities captured one of 2 other inmates who escaped with Yaden.
Go ahead.
The inmate had injured his leg in the attempt and was unable to get far on foot. He explained to authorities how they got out. He said that Yaden had designed the plan. In the jail's black market, he bartered for an Allen wrench and a hacksaw. Yaden unlocked maintenance panels to gain access to air ducts that led to the roof. He cut through ductwork, then the roof to get outside. A 4th man stayed behind to replace the panel. The escapees moved along the roof of the jail, then jumped over the wall. Once on the outside, the inmates said they split up. That was the last time he saw Yaden. Prison officials called FBI Special Agent John Shum to give him the bad news.
Once I heard Yaden escaped yet again from federal custody, my first reaction was I was very angry, because here was a guy that had a history of having escaped numerous times in the past. The people that were responsible for his custody knew his history, and they should have been more careful.
Investigators believed Yaden would likely head toward family and friends in DeKalb County, Alabama.
Have you seen Roger lately?
No, he's been
Agents
in jail
interviewed
this
anyone
month.
Yaden might have contacted in the area, including an ex-girlfriend.
Have you talked to him on the phone? Letter?
No letters.
Like the others, she said she hadn't seen or heard from him. They left a card and told her to call if Yaden surfaced.
Think of anything, call him?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you that.
After the agents left, she admitted to her current boyfriend that she had let Yaden hide in her house.
It was an accident.
He was upstairs in the attic.
I guess he's your guy, but he's gotten himself into a lot of trouble.
The boyfriend was upset and called police. Nearby officers responded. They didn't know if Yaden was armed and waiting for them. Five weeks after his escape from New Mexico, officers finally cornered Roger Yaden. Captured in DeKalb County, Alabama, Roger Yaden's crime spree ended where it began. His escape nullified the deal with federal prosecutors.
Go ahead, check this area.
He was charged with the crimes he had committed during his last escape from Alabama. Alabama Assistant Attorney General David Estes prosecuted Yaden in Talladega.
The jury in this case deliberated for a very short period of time, an hour at the most, and they came back and they convicted Roger Dale Yaden of 3 counts of kidnapping in the first degree, 2 counts of robbery in the first degree, and 1 count of escape in the first degree.
Yaden received 5 concurrent life sentences without parole. Now in maximum lockdown, Roger Yaden will never leave Alabama prison alive.